Okay, here we go. Okay, so this week is Parashat Korach, and everyone knows about the rebellion that Korach didn't accept Moshe's authority and his choice for the person to become the leader of the Jewish people. And the halacha, one of the halachas is that comes out of this is respecting rabbinic authority and basically rabbinic rulings. And a practical example of this is if you like a certain food product, it's a type of food, and you really think, it should be kosher, and the Rav says, and the Beis Din says, no, it ain't kosher, you cannot go against what the ruling is. Once the ruling is made, it has to be accepted and applied. Okay. Second one is respecting designated roles and boundaries. And for instance, I can't go and duchen with our resident Cohen, Mr. Gavin Stoller. And the other example is in a shul. It's in terms of religious matters. Um, unless I have been designated to correct a Pal Kore when he does the laning, then I should do so. One can't interject uh, if it's not my place and if I haven't been assigned that role. So it's also respect and giving kavod to people and not overstepping boundaries.
Cool.
Uh,
Kev, thanks. All right, let's get cracking quickly. Now, if I had to ask from what I understood from Arthur a few days ago, is that because he had to do a lot of bunker work as well as you, Kevin, is that you guys might not have been that alert. So this is going to be a bullet fast summary shear with some new points and one or two clarifications from last time. Give me a sec. I'm just closing the door. Okay. I've got some clarification on one or two things. All right, let's get started. So look, just quick summary. The Mishnah taught that groups of witnesses do not become one set unless they see each other. So obviously the same holds true for one witness who do not manage to see the other witness. In other words, we know that for groups, we learn this from a single witness. How do we know? Rav Zutra Bar Tovia said in the name of Rav. From where do we know that the testimony of isolated witnesses is invalid? Because there is a pasuk, and that pasuk which Gavin Simpson and Aidan managed to pick up of a few what would seem to be superfluous redundancies or not, because the full verse in Devarim chapter 17 verse 6 reads, by the testimony of two witnesses or three witnesses, the one who deserves to die be executed. He shall not be executed by the testimony of one witness. So what does this rephrasing of the testimony of one witness imply, since we see we need a minimum of two? So that can be inferred from the first part of the statement. So what it implies is that the term one witness means one by one. In other words, individuals who witness an event in isolation from each other. So the verse teaches that their testimony is not sufficient to sentence a person to death because they do not combine to form a set of witnesses. Okay? So that was a quick summary. We learned that in the Bryce as well. He shall not be executed by the testimony of one witness. And what is the Bryce coming to teach that you can't infer from the Gemara? Is that it includes two witnesses who observe him committing an offense, from one from this window and one from that window, east and west wing, but they do not see each other. Okay? And it teaches that they do not combine to form a set of witnesses, rather their testimony remains the separate statements of a single witness. Okay. But even if the two witnesses viewed the crime one after the other from the same window, they do not combine to form a set of witnesses, since they did not witness the event simultaneously. So what does the Brisa add? It uses this phrase, not only this, because it's basically introducing the last ruling, implying that the invalidation of the testimony in that case is more novel than the first case. So the Gemara says, hang on a second, if you're using this Bryce as an example, Rav Papa has a question on a buyer. And he said, look, if you've got one witness from this window and he viewed the entire act, and you have a separate witness from an entirely different window, but that saw the entire act. If you say that that means that they cannot combine to form one set of witnesses, and each of them viewed the entire matter, then what makes you think that you need to be told that one after another, in other words, this witness viewed the first half of the act, and the other witness viewed the second half of the act? What makes you think it's even necessary for the Tana to teach it? It's obvious that it would seem that they don't combine to form a set of witnesses. So the Gemara, and this is where I'm going to clarify a little bit from the other day. Abaye replied to Rava, look, this ruling isn't necessary in the case of a homicide, but where this ruling is necessary is in the case of a person cohabiting with a forbidden woman. You know, another man's wife, a woman that's forbidden to him because it might be an incestuous relationship with father's wife, etc. But let's just say it's a normal adultery case. So what you're saying is in a adultery case, it's not necessary for the witnesses to observe the entire act, but merely to see enough of the act to make it clear that they engaged in a conjugal relationship, meaning having sex. So you don't have to watch it from the point of foreplay right to orgasm. It's enough that you know that the couple are having sex. Okay. So two witnesses each briefly observe a part of this forbidden act, and yet they testify about a full crime. So the Brisa must therefore teach that they nevertheless do not combine to form the set of witnesses necessary to have him executed, since they did not witness it simultaneously. Now, before, what I thought is that, okay, with regards to an adultery matter, it's different, but it was meant to show an exception in an adultery matter compared to a homicide. So this is something very interesting, which the Ritva brought, and I was learning this today at Chofetz Chaim, this evening between Mincha and Mariv, is the Ritva says, no, if two of the witnesses, and he explains the other Meforshim, and this seems to be the general opinion, if two witnesses are together and they happen to see a couple engaging in a sexual act, but they do not view the sexual act from start to finish, but it's enough that they can realize that they are having intercourse, that's a farce to convict both of them for adultery and get the death sentence. However, and this is where it's distinguished, if the one witness view the first part of the act at which adultery did occur, and he left and then said, dude, you got to check out what's happening across the window. Such and such, our neighbors are busy getting it on. And the other guy said, oh, cool, let me see. So he goes to have a look. Now, the two witnesses, according to the Ritva, are aware of each other. And that's where the novelty lies, is that they are aware of each other. But even if they're aware of each other, the one saw the first half of the act and the other one saw the second half of the act. It still isn't sufficient to combine them to convict the two parties involved in adultery, because they didn't view the act together. In other words, it's not about how much of the act they viewed, it's that they never viewed it together. So whether it's a case of a homicide where the entire act has to be viewed, or adultery case where it's enough to see that they're involved in sex and not the entire act, for the witnesses to convict both the male and female of the adultery, or even a homosexual act, or whatever the case may be, the reality is they have to have seen it both together in the case of a homicide and an adultery case, except on a homicide, the entire act, but in an adultery case, the act in part, as long as they could see that intercourse was taking place. Okay, so that's a novelty from the other day that I had to do further investigation. Okay, because it was bugging me a little bit. Now, quickly, there's another ruling about how to combine witnesses, and that is if the person giving the warning was able to see each of the set of witnesses, um, the two witnesses in the east wing window and two witnesses in the west wing window. Or alternatively, um, the witnesses in the east wing and the west wing were able to see the person giving the warning, even though they didn't see each other. So that is a way to combine them, and that goes with a single witness as well. Okay. So now that we see a way to combine them, we want to know basically whose warning is considered acceptable. Now, according to Rava, the one giving the warning of whom they spoke may even be the victim himself. So it's basically saying that it suffices that person giving the warning isn't necessarily a witness, because we thought up until now, well, what do you mean? The person witnessing the crime is the one giving the warning. How could it be somebody different, and would it suffice? So the case of the victim, the person is killed by the murderer, but before he's killed, he said, "Don't kill me. It's not, think of yourself. Even if you hate me, you would lose your own life. It's a death penalty offense." And he's not able to testify that he gave the warning. And he wasn't witness to the culmination of his own death, nor could testify in court. So the thing of it is, in that particular case, it doesn't matter. If the two witnesses heard the warning from the victim, that suffices. If the two witnesses heard the warning from the murderer, saying, "I caught you with my wife. You've been stealing half my business and having an affair with my wife. Now I'm going to kill you." And he said, "I know I'm going to get the death penalty for it, but you deserve it." So that's considered a warning that is audibly heard by the witnesses. It can even go as far as saying a demon. What do we mean, a demon? We're not talking, there might be opinions that say Kabbalistically it's a demon or a spiritual voice, but what we mean is generally sometimes it can refer to the murderer himself, who's in a bit of a demonic state, not sane, but it mostly refers to somebody where you cannot almost discern who's giving the warning. In most cases, you can see if it's the victim, the murderer, or somebody else giving the warning. When they use the term a demon, it means somebody that you hear the voice, clearly the sets of witnesses, but they cannot discern who uttered the voice. And that suffices as long as the witnesses can concur. Okay, now the Gemara returns to the rule of isolated witnesses. And what does Rav Nachman say? He said, look, the testimony of isolated witnesses is effective in monetary cases. What's the reason? Because if you look at the pasuk, it says, he shall not be executed by the testimony of one witness, which means in a monetary case, one witness that can be combined with a separate witness. We're not talking about one witness testifying in a monetary case against the defendant. The only thing that one witness can do against the defendant is force the defendant to take an oath with Hashem's name that he did not commit damage, or he did not borrow the money. But what we are saying is here, witnesses in isolation, they don't have to see the incident together. So if I'm coming from Norwood Mall and I see from the Discam entrance a car being smashed by another car, and somebody else is at Mug and Bean and they see the same thing, but we don't see each other, we can be combined in a monetary case to testify against the defendant that he left the scene without paying for the damage. So that's according to Rav Nachman, and that makes sense because the pasuk purely relates to execution. He shall not be executed by the testimony of one witness. As Aidan said, one witness means superfluous because it's said by the testimony of two witnesses or three witnesses. So it's coming to say one witness in isolation is not effective and they cannot join. But monetary cases it is. So Rav Zutra said, look, I've got a particular challenge. When it comes to a capital case, and we have two witnesses in the west wing and two witnesses in the east wing, why don't we combine it? Why would we combine it? Because whatever we can do to get the defendant off would make sense, because we always look for mercy for a capital case. And therefore, the bigger the single group of witnesses, the more likely it is that one gets discredited because he could be a relative of one of the witnesses, or the principals in the case, meaning the defendant or the plaintiff, and therefore he has a bias. He's either wants to get his relative on his relative side and get him maybe off a capital case and say, no, he was innocent. Or perhaps he hates his relative and would like to have him hanged. Families are dysfunctional. But there is a bias. So we're saying that discreditation can occur. Adam Zommermim is another aspect, whereas if one of the witnesses was not there to view it and was caught by other witnesses in a different province, or maybe out of four witnesses, two were caught being in a different province at where they said they allegedly saw the crime. In that particular case, the defendant wouldn't be killed, even though there's a valid set of witnesses left of two, because they're not two separate groups, and the Adam Zommerman wouldn't be killed. So for all concerned, according to Rav Zutra to Rav Nachman, let's combine sets of witnesses in order to get the defendant off. And the Gemara said, look, it is an excellent point, and it's a difficulty to answer it. But despite this difficulty, it's the accepted halacha. Okay? Makes sense. Now we're going back to Rav Yossi's statement. Now Rav Yossi is of the opinion that no person can be executed unless both the witnesses who testify against him had in fact warned him. So Rav Yossi is even more strict to get the defendant off, and it requires a warning as a formal precondition for issuing a death sentence. Now, if the only reason for the warning, guys, is to prove that the offender was aware of what he was doing was forbidden and liable to the death penalty, it doesn't mean that the witnesses have to be the one giving the warning. Okay? Neither would it be to break that murderer out of that rage that he's in, to break his state in like neurolinguistical program saying, wait, stop, you're going to die for this. So you don't need the witnesses to do it. So according to Rav Yossi, he considers this proof that it's a biblically decreed requirement. It's a prerequisite for a death sentence to be enforced. And it's an additional way to determine the guilt of the accused. Okay? So the Gemara questions this. Rav Papa says to Abaya, look, Rav Yossi, does he really subscribe to this view? Because we learn in a Mishnah, and it will come up in 9b, we're in 6b, Rav Yossi says an enemy is executed for killing his foe, even if he was not warned prior to the killing, and cannot claim as a defense that the killing was an accident, because he's considered alerted and forewarned. Okay? So what we are saying is here is we're talking about an inadvertent killing. So an inadvertent killing, he was busy on his roof, and accidentally he dropped a concrete block on the victim's head, and he died, and he said, listen, it was an accident. But everybody knew in the town that he hated him. And you know, it goes as far in that duff as turning around and saying, if he has enmity against his fellow for 3 days, meaning they're not on speaking terms for the last 3 days, even though they were best of mates, if it smells fishy, it is fishy. And therefore, because there's clearly a dislike that the one has for the other, you can't say he met with an accident, as in the mafia term. He's considered to be forewarned because he has a motive for killing this person. He hated his victim, and therefore it can be assumed he killed him deliberately. So if Rav Yossi said that if somebody is an enemy and accidentally kills his fellow Jew, he's considered forewarned, it means then that those two people that witnessed that inadvertent killing of that concrete block falling off his roof and killing the Jew whom he hates, it doesn't apply, because the witnesses would have to see the concrete rolling off the roof and say to the homeowner, hang on, hold it quickly, or tell the victim to get out the way, or else he's going to die. So why in that case does Rav Yossi not consider the warning having to come from those two witnesses? And Abaya says to Rav Papa, look, we're talking about two different Rav Yossis there. So Rav Yossi of Mishnah 9a is Rav Yossi Bar Yehuda. And it's not the Tana in our Mishnah that's generally referred to as Rav Yossi, which is Rav Yossi Bar Chalafta. So in the Gemara, Rav Yossi Bar Chalafta, our Rav Yossi, is much more well known, and he's the one that said that the witnesses have to give the warning, and it's different to Yossi Bar Yehuda, who in the ninth daf said, listen, you're considered forewarned. And even more than that, Rav Yossi Bar Yehuda in the ninth daf turns around and says, listen, they don't even have to be enemies. If this person was a Talmud Chochem and a scholar, he doesn't require a warning because he knows of the consequence of his actions. And the only reason why you need a warning generally is to distinguish between an unintentional offender and the deliberate one. Meaning, if a person doesn't know the law, then it's excusable. But if they do know the law, there's no excuse. So, in this particular case, we're not talking about premeditation, but the bottom line is they're two different Rav Yossi, so they're not contradicting each other. So Rav Yossi Bar Yehuda doesn't require a formal precondition of a warning from the witnesses for a death sentence, but our Rav Yossi Bar Chalafta, is known as the Rav Yossi, does. So our Mishnah is saying that the witnesses have to provide the warning. Okay. Just quickly, another teaching. It says in the Mishnah, by the testimony of two witnesses, that the Sanhedrin, what does it mean by the testimony of two witnesses? You've got to understand the witnesses. It's the same thing when it has to do with the defendant or the plaintiff. You have to understand them in their language. So the Sanhedrin shouldn't listen through an interpreter because either the interpreter could get it wrong or they might have it in for the defendant or the plaintiff, or they might be on their side. So you're not going to really get objective testimony. The only way that this can be eliminated is if the Sanhedrin understand the language not only of the witnesses, but of the plaintiff and defendant. And we said that there was the members of the Sanhedrin had to be extremely rich so that they wouldn't be bribable. They also had to be brilliant and understand be multilingual and understand everything from Aramaic to Hebrew to Greek and Latin and the languages spoken of the day so that they could converse correctly. So there was a particular incident, and there Gemara reports, listen, there were people speaking only a foreign language who came before Rava in court. So Rava appointed an interpreter to serve between them, and the Gemara says, well, how could this be? Did we not just learn in our Mishnah that the Sanhedrin should not hear through an interpreter? How did Rava do such a thing? So the Gemara answers, it was and when you say you come before the judge, it can refer to litigants, witnesses, etc. But as far as Rava was concerned, and the entire Sanhedrin, Rava understood the language of the witnesses and then the plaintiff and the defendant. The only issue was he was not super confident in his grammar in answering, but he understood the language very well and therefore used an interpreter so they would understand what he was saying correctly. And then when they responded, he could understand them, no problem. So then it's not a contradiction because as long as their testimony was heard accurately. And then one last thing, the Gemara records another court proceeding in which the validity of witnesses was questioned on the grounds of kinship. What did we learn that kinship was? A relationship. So if you are related to the witnesses, I'm going to have time for questions now, or if you have a relationship with the plaintiff or the defendant, you cannot testify. So the Gemara brings one last case. Elijah and Tuvia were the relatives of a co-signer to a loan. They were also witnesses to the loan itself. So when litigation required that the loan came before the court, Rav Papa thought to say that they're eligible to testify about the loan. Why? Because they're not related to the lender and they're not related to the borrower, who are the principals in the case. So the position is rejected according to Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, and he said to Rav Papa, look, there's a problem here. If the borrower will not have the money to repay the debt, who they're going to go after? The lender's going to go after the co-signers to collect the debt. And therefore, anybody related to the co-signer must be considered a principal in this case. Sorry, anybody that's related to the co-signer can not testify because the co-signer will become a principal to this case because he has a lot to lose. And therefore, you've got to disqualify anybody in terms of ramification that is going to be related to the co-signers of the loan. All right, we done. Has everybody understood what we're saying? Is there any questions?
Yes, I've got one.
Okay, is it relevant?
Uh, yes. So
Okay.
how does the best then prove that the victim gave warnings?
Well, through the witnesses. In other words, the only issue here is Rav Yossi is saying that in order to fulfill the biblical decree, that the witnesses themselves have to issue the warning. And according to the Tanakama, which is the halachic rabbinical opinion, it doesn't matter who issues the warning. It doesn't have to be the witnesses themselves. That's the only point being made. So as long as the witnesses hear the warnings issued, that suffices. They don't have to give the warning. That's the only point the Gemara is giving to the Mishnah. That's it.
But it's a bit of an
Okay.
issue. It's a bit of an issue if it's an external person, in my opinion, because if it's an external person, especially if it's the victim himself giving it, there's no one to testify that the warning was ever given.
Yes, it
Yes.
is, Gav, because the two witnesses that are in the particular case said they heard the victim screaming and saying, "Don't kill me. Do you know you'll get the death penalty for it? I'm sorry I slept with your wife." You know, so that suffices as long as the witness can corroborate it. But according to Rav Yossi, a defendant will most likely get off because they have to be the one that issued the warning. It's a bit difficult from an apartment building to issue a warning, and then the defendant's going to get off. So
Okay,
each of the sets of witnesses, each of the sets of witnesses, or the two witnesses that witnessed the homicide together, can testify that they heard the victim issuing a warning and the consequence. It suffices.
And
Nothing wrong with that.
and do they both need to have heard it, you think, or not?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm happy with that. All right. Great, thank you. That's perfect.
Okay. Any other questions? I made this quick, Gav, because you have to go. By the way, at 7.
Oh no, I'm done.
Damon,
Okay. Yeah.
can you just go over this part? I'm very tired, like with Arthur, when we in the shelter. It's just about that, what Gavin just said. Can you just give the background to it?
Yeah, so the background is
Just
Gavin
repeat
was
it, please. Yeah.
worried that the witnesses, it would only require one witness to said he heard the warning, which would be very unfair to the defendant because it would convict the defendant. So
Warning for what action?
warning
For
because
to
in order to
unintentional murder.
it's called Hazroa. So we learn in Sanhedrin Hazroa is a warning that the murderer has to get, that murder is prohibited according to the Torah, and that the
Oh, okay.
consequence is that he's going to suffer capital punishment. Okay? So therefore, we learned that there were two different opinions. The one is that a general warning that it was a capital case and the punishment would be that he'd lose his life, and the other one a specific sort of death penalty. But most hold it as long as he knows he's going to lose his life and it's prohibited by the Torah, that would suffice. But both witnesses have to hear the warning. That's the bottom line, Kevin. And according to Rav Yossi, the witnesses themselves have to issue the warning. According to the Tanakama, only as long as the witnesses both hear the warning, it doesn't matter if it's from a third party. And we're saying, how can it be that a third party would not be the witnesses themselves? Well, if it's the victim, it won't be the witness themselves because he's dead. And if it's the murderer saying, I'm going to kill you, he's not going to testify against himself. So that's an example. Those are two examples. Okay.
Sorry, Dame, just one question on my
Yeah,
side.
Gavin.
Um, in terms of the warning, right, you got to be very specific in terms of what the death penalty is going to be. Now, is this a Torah decree? I understand the warning is a Torah decree, but are the specifics that you'll be liable for X, Y, and Z, is that Torah defined, or is that a rabbinic injunction on the warning itself?
So what I've done is we actually went through it before. So I can actually send you that chat that I sent to the group because we covered this. I think as far back as the beginning of Makkos, and even in not in Bavli, it was in the beginning of Makkos from Sanhedrin. So you don't have privy to that. So I'm absolutely happy to send it to the group.
Cool, thanks.
All right, and the source, etc., and the two opinions, etc. Happy to do it. Thank you. I appreciate you telling me to do that. Not a problem at all. Okay, guys, before you
Damon,
finish,
sorry, Damon,
yeah,
just going back, sorry, before you sign off,
yeah.
they warn the guy what the consequences could be for murder. Is this if he was contemplating, was the actual scenario?
So, firstly,
What was
they have to say exactly as Gavin Simpson said, that even by the most lenient opinion, they've got to say murder is one of the 10 commandments. It's prohibited by the Torah, and the consequence is capital punishment. You will lose your life. That would suffice. By a more stringent opinion, at which I'm going, I don't remember offhand. I'm happy to send it to you guys while look in Sanhedrin. Then you have to say specifically what form of death penalty is going to be consequentially there. But that's a specific lone opinion. Because who's going to be that learned? Any murderer is going to get off, because all they have to do is commit a homicide in a group of idiots. And the majority of people are idiots. Yeah.
Was this guy considering killing
No,
someone? Is that why they warned
he
him?
pulled out a knife. You know, the other guy said,
Okay,
he
okay.
said,
That's
you
what I
know,
wanted to hear.
I've caught you defrauding me, and you and my wife went to Hawaii together, and he
Okay.
pulls out a samurai sword. The guy knows he's going to get shit off. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know he's not going to be cleaning his nails with it. So yeah, let's just, instead of looking at odd cases, let's just look at a general rule. All right, guys, I hope the summary was quick and made sense to every one of you. Any questions? Lance, you quiet? Made sense? Lance had a hectic move. Mazel tov, Lance, in your new place. Okay.
I've got a quick question for Kevin, but it's not the share related.
Okay, just hang on a second, guys. Just before we go on, did the summary help any of you? Would you give me feedback?
Yeah, no, it was very good.
Thanks.
Thank you. Can I ask to leave?
No, we're done. We're done. Listen, if Brendan, if you want to serenade Kevin, phone him on WhatsApp, and you two can talk.
Yeah.
Well, you can say on the link. We can go off the link.
Yeah. Everybody, you can go off the link. I can stop the recording.
Thanks,
And thanks for the share.
Wow. Yeah, well done.
Sure, thanks, Damon.
Very good.
Same time tomorrow,
Cheers,
6:20
thank
p.m.
you.
Cheers, guys.